Hi, this is Tom from Disgruntled Wargamer. Today I'm building a wagon, and I'm making it up as I go along. What that means to you, the viewer, is that you have a chance to witness folly, futility, frustration, and out of that fuss, a finished model will emerge, fully developed and ready for fun on the tabletop. Some of the pieces I'm working with, like this pink foam core board, will be tossed aside for more suitable components. The wooden wheels, for example, I'll keep, along with the wooden suspension. At first, I toy with the idea of cutting grooves into the foam core board in order to make it look like wood. I peel off the paper, measure it up against the wheels, and set it aside. For the axle, I start by looking at some aluminum tubing. It's hollow, so to cut it properly you need a special pipe cutting tool, preferably a miniature one. Mine is missing. So I set that aside in favor of a sterilized lollipop stick. My love for root beer flavored dum-dums has come in handy. Turns out the lollipop stick is too large in diameter. So I pull out my trusty drill, note that the bit left installed is too small, grab my bit box, size up an approximate drill bit, and completely misjudge the size. Turns out my eye isn't as calibrated as I want it to be, or maybe lollipop sticks are metric. Someday I'll take a caliper to one and find out. My next attempt with the good old Black & Decker works much better. The lollipop stick fits almost perfectly, and the wheel is able to spin freely. That is a bug, however, not a feature. We will glue this up so the wheels won't move. The axle is too long, so I make some quick marks allowing for bed size, springs, and wheels on both sides of the cart bed. Then, with the long-lost kitchen scissors, I snip the stick where I made the mark, drill through the springs, and test fit everything one more time. Groovy. Figuring out what to do next, or what material to use, takes a moment. Sometimes you have to explore the model from different angles, or try scrap materials to help formulate a plan. In this case, I decide the cart needs some pulls for some sort of yoke. I imagine the cart is being pulled by a civilian labor jack, a steam-powered mechanical robot, basically. The cart would serve as both a coal bin and a salvage wagon. I also decide to snap the wheel, to give a reason for the wagon's abandonment. The cart owner left the wagon, cargo and all, behind somewhere on a battlefield because of the broken wheel. He either has to find a replacement or find a way to repair it. And that's a good thing for us, as our armies will undoubtedly find the cart to be sufficient cover against small arms fire. Next, I test fit a pair of warjack legs, which will hang off the edge of the cart. These legs belonged to a forgotten lancer, the Signar Light Warjack that came in the starter battle box at the Mark II and Mark III era. I cut some stirrer sticks to use as some side paneling for the cart. It doesn't pay to have a salvage cart where everything falls off when you hit a bump. Even smaller sticks make posts. The diagonal wire cutters actually make the perfect tool for cutting these. It leaves somewhat of a rough edge, but it cuts in a straight line, and you'll always know where the cut's going to be. Once all the sticks are cut, I grab my favorite wood glue, because this is wood we are in fact gluing, and glue the planks to the posts. Or rather, I glue the posts to the planks since the planks are sitting on the table. I'm leaving enough post hanging over the planks to allow for attaching to the cart's bed, and maybe for hanging add-ons. This takes a lot of care, and like a pro, I get glue all over my hands, the workbench, and generally make a mess of things. One of the sticks wasn't flat, one of the ones that I was using for a plank, so I have to use clamps to hold it together to the post. After running out of tiny clamps, I end up using an old project to weigh down the other side wall. And now, we'll let the music play while we wait for the glue to dry. Just kidding, I'm going to skip ahead. I take the clamps off the paneling, then trim off excess with a hobby knife. No, that doesn't work. The knife won't cut, but a back saw will. It makes short work of the thin stock. The hobby knife redeems itself by shaving off splinters. I did some digging around in a parts box and found some old walls I was going to use in a trench project. Too bad, these would have made perfect sidewalls. Instead, I think I'll use them as a floor. Now we're going to throw away the foam, like I talked about earlier. I measure it up against the foam, and then I take the back saw and cut it so that it's more or less square. Using a block of foam to support the model, I glue the wheels up to the cart bed. I promptly forget the foam and start messing around with the sidewalls, imperiling the whole wheel cart bed attachment I just made. Watch and be amazed as the whole thing falls apart in my hands. I try again. First with the block, and then propping the model up against its wheel, and then balancing it, pushing physics to the limit. Who knows if this will last? And now I add skirting to the underside of the cart. A few segments of what was the wall base from earlier trims up nicely to form skirting. This will give depth to hide the planks that form the cart's bed. It also hides the suspension so I don't have to detail it. This is wargaming terrain after all, not a diorama and not a model railroad, so a little bit of fudging on the details is acceptable. I make my marks with a black pen, cut with a sharp blade or pliers, and glue with wood glue. Remember, clear drying wood glue is preferred for this application because it's specifically made to bond wood, which is what the planks are made from. And now I finally return to the yoke. A pair of dowels make for a natural set of handles. Remember, this cart is being pulled by a bipedal steam-powered robot, so it makes sense that it would be able to use these handles rather than require a rig for a horse or an ox. At this point, I'm feeling quite pleased with myself. You can see that this object is indeed a cart and it's coming together very nicely. And now, adding the jack to the back of the cart. I don't want to waste an entire war jack, even if it's just excess. Shields and spears can be repurposed and used elsewhere, in other models or on the battlefield as other terrain pieces. So instead, I'll disconnect the legs and use foam blocks to create the illusion of a war jack underneath the tarp. I trace the basic shape, trim with a hobby knife, and keep test fitting before finally adding glue. The legs may have a more difficult time bonding to the wood. Sometimes I use hot glue for materials that differ in nature, but the Gorilla Super Glue, the gel specifically, works pretty well in this situation. I like the gel because I have more control over it as I apply it to the model. And now it's time to cover the war jack with a tarp. The cloth that I am using is an old bed sheet. I believe this was a Martha Stewart collection, 100% cotton, from Kmart, maybe? I don't remember. It's old, and I promise that it already had holes in it before I started cutting. I spend the next few minutes trimming the cloth to fit. I don't want the fancy seam in there, so I make sure I trim that off as well. I'm not worried about the creases, as you can see the cloth has some pretty permanent looking folds in it, but they'll come out when the cloth is glued in later. Before adding the cloth, I need to prime the model. So I brush on black. And I know there's a lot of critique about priming with black, but it's what I have on hand, number one, and I don't want to use a rattle can because I haven't sealed any of the foam and I don't want to wait for Mod Podge or glue to dry. Black in this situation is actually pretty perfect. It hides all the areas where I don't want to add detail. This is one of the steps where it pays to spend a little time making sure you have every bit covered. You don't want blue or pale wood popping out from under a canvas after it's all been assembled. Here is the magic moment where the cloth is finally applied to the primed model. Yes, I do keep watered down glue in a Febreze bottle, and yes, it smells amazing. No matter what you do, you cannot remove the smell of Febreze from a Febreze bottle. A little primer mixed into the glue makes it jet black. The cloth goes in, and my fingers look like I'm frostbit. This will dry for several hours, and it will take me several minutes to remove the black stains from my fingertips. the fancy wet palette means it's time for paint. This project requires no real blending or fancy techniques. So the paper on the palette is just used to hold the paint. I've got some blues for the warjack, probably a Prussian blue and a dark Prussian blue. I probably should have written these down while I was working. I have a tannish brown for the cloth, gunmetal for the metal bits, and another brown color. I'll add red in a little while, and I think I add white for some lettering. The paper towel will keep my model from picking up dust from the table, and also serves as a place to wipe my brushes while dry brushing. My brushes are old and frayed, and that's fine because, again, this is a piece of terrain. I don't need a whole lot of precision, except for when I get to the lettering. I bring in some lighter shades of ochre and a light brown for wood. I start with the wooden posts and accents and include all the skirting. This color has a neat yellowish hue, which will contrast well with the blue warjack. Eventually all of the wooden pieces will get hit with this color, and some parts will even get a second coat. The second coat is very vibrant, and I do my best to sort of blend it so the most vibrant shade is on top where light hits it, and it's a little more muted where there should be shadow. This forced shading is tabletop fakery. It's an exaggeration of color in an effort to trick our brains so we pull the important details out of the model rather than to be true to what it is. I'm not great at this. When you look at most of my models on the tabletop, it looks like you're hundreds of yards or meters away, and sometimes you can't pick out features like faces. That's realistic, because in essence we are. That's the thing with scale. You're only 4 feet away, but it seems like you're 400 meters. The solution is a very two-dimensional solution. Imagine light is shining from a specific source and use your paint's colors to artificially create a shadow where there won't be any normally, and to highlight areas where the light should be shining and reflecting more color back at you. Again, this is artificially creating detail where you wouldn't normally be able to see any, because scaled down it's really far away from your eye. The cloth will get some brown tans to look like a worn tarp, maybe recycled from a military tent. It's a similar color but darker than the wood. This will make it stand out from the planks. It's very much definitely a brown and not a yellow. A lighter buff color gets dry brushed on for an artificial highlight. You can see a deep shadow where the cloth falls over the side of the cargo and into the cart. This is a good example of the amplified highlight and shadow that gives the model extra depth. Again, I'm only hitting the top of the cloth in order to make the folds really stand out. For the legs, I grab some blue, and I begin with the armored knee pads. I blend some of the blue with the tan and buff to make a highlight color, and with that highlight, I hit the tops and edges of the legs. After I'm satisfied with the cargo, I go back and mix some green for the cloth. This could be interpreted as grass stains or camouflage. It's whatever the viewer decides to make of it. Finally, gunmetal goes on all the metal bits. I blend it with a dark reddish brown for shading, and I commit an absolute sin, mixing my metallic and non-metallic paints, because frankly, I don't care. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to work on a project with some scouts. We refurbished a historical 17th century wagon, and one of the things I learned on that project is that people throughout time liked color. Reds, yellows, blues, greens, whatever they could get their hands on. They also recognized that treating wood protected it. I took that lesson and applied it here. So instead of being a natural wood, the wheels would receive a nice shade of red. This is, after all, a civilian cart, not a military one. The owner of the cart, in my head, enjoys red. I've also decided the owner would paint the name of his company on the side of the cart. Now, I've seen some runes or make-believe fonts used to represent the Iron Kingdom's text, but it was always understood that the symbols appearing in artwork depicting this setting wasn't representative of written text. So, being an English speaker, I am using English to write on the cart. A nice game color white will be easy to write with. It has a very opaque property to it, and it feels kind of thick, much more than the model color paints that Vallejo also makes. Off camera, I clipped some small wires and turned them into tie-down rings. I also clipped some string. It's the hemp bracelet making string used for bead jewelry. I drill some holes into the cart and then I glue the rings into the holes. The rings get some brown brushed on to take their shine away. After, I run the string through the tie downs to hold the tarp in place and to keep the warjack from spilling out if there was an accident. In truth, everything's glued in, so nothing will ever fall out. But in this, our artificial reality, it makes sense for the owner of the cart to want to secure his cargo. I also touched the strings up with a little bit of the same brown that I used earlier, and then I look over the cart to see if I missed anything and touch up as needed. And there it is on the table. It's about 2 inches tall, so it should block line of sight to any small base model, and it should provide cover to larger bases. The handle should provide no defensive bonus, and the main cart should be considered an obstruction, while the handles should be considered simply obstacles to walk across.